Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about implementation within Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, and I'm going to be covering a little bit about the role of the WIHU backbone. A lot of this information that I'm going to cover today you can actually find in your A Guide to Moving Forward, so that's also a bit of a manual for sites, so you can reference that as well post this module, and it will give you a lot of similar information. You can delve a little bit more deeply into the concepts we cover. So, what is the WIHU backbone and how is it there to support you in your site? So the WIHU backbone is really a support system for sites. It's led by Dr. Joanna Henderson, and it's made up of members of the teams from across the province from the Provincial System Support Program at CAMH and also the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health. So how the backbone can support you. The backbone is really a network of these connected teams that are working together to help each site achieve a level of standardization and fidelity to the model while also contextualizing it to their local community to make sure that it's working, the sites are working, and the hubs are working in a way that's really going to resonate with youth and families in your community and make sense for service providers as well. For our backbone support, we're using a model called implementation science. So that's a methodology that came out of the National Implementation Research Network, or NIRN. And if you want more information about NIRN, we're happy to provide that, and you can find them online as well. And really, we're using that implementation methodology so that we can support sites to move through a process of thinking through the hub model in their community, implementing that model, trying that model out, and then continuing to quality improve that model over time. And so really sort of a systematic way of thinking through how this needs to look in your community. And that's really why our backbone is here, to bring that sort of expertise around thinking through implementation. And we'll delve a little bit more deeply into that and how that looks as we move through this module. So each WIHU site is receiving support from our backbone to deliver on 13 core components of the model. And Dr. Joanna Henderson has covered those 13 components in more detail, but really that is the impetus of what we're trying to do together, is to be able to implement these 13 components in a way that aligns with evidence, aligns with research evidence, aligns with the experiential evidence of youth and families that we've heard for decades across the system, and also aligns with what we know from service providers about what creates meaningful outcomes. And so layering all of those pieces together, we have the 13 core components of WIHU and the target implementation of each of those components, so what we want to achieve over time. So each WIHU site has received some seed funds to get them started, but really what we're talking about through the support of the backbone is transforming the way that we support youth and communities across the province. And that transformation is really done by in-kinding and shifting resources that are already existing in our service system, and then integrating approaches and how we think about governance and delivery of service and our service provision pathways. And so to do that, and with the support of implementation, we're anticipating seeing some key milestones across sites. The first one is that we're seeing a co-development of a local approach to service provision planning with youth and families. So meaningfully engaging them and involving them in thinking through the service pathway and how services are going to be delivered within the hub. The next piece is that we're convening site-specific local implementation teams and advisory groups. And so for those of you that are watching this that already are engaged in existing hubs, you may have youth advisories in place, family advisories in place, or consults in place. You probably have an integrated governance structure or model. And so we're really thinking through all of those pieces, and the backbone is here to support you in thinking through how those need to look, how those integrated governance structures need to look for your local community. The next piece is that we're developing site-specific implementation and coaching plans. So this is a bit of an iterative process that's done over time with the network and our backbone can support. And really what we want to see here is that we have streams of service and that we have a process for coaching to those streams. And so many hubs will sort of have two streams that they're kind of thinking about in relation to how to implement and how to coach ongoing to those pieces. The first is sort of more the operations of the hub, so how the hub operates, the policies, procedures, how the integrated governance works together, how the advisories work within that structure, and then the other piece is clinical. And so what is your service provision model? What are your clinical pathways? What are your approaches to clinical service? And that both of those streams sort of require an ongoing approach to how to implement them, how to put them into practice, tweaking them. As we know, when something's put in practice, we often learn from that and then tweak as we go, and then also coaching to those pieces. So how are we providing clinical supervision insight so that we see that quality of service that we want to see delivered across all sites? And then also how are we supporting and coaching in an ongoing way to those providing direct service within sites? Another piece is that we anticipate achieving some brand consistency across all the sites. This has been sort of a work in progress for us, really trying to think through what the most appropriate brand is. But when we're talking about this at this point, even if you don't have sort of a standardized brand, we can kind of take that concept a little bit higher level and think about the consistency in how we're talking about the work that we're doing, the consistency in how we're thinking about quality of service, and the messaging that we put out about that. And so we do anticipate that sort of standardization across sites will allow us to speak in a way that's cohesive and has a common vision in relation to Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. We anticipate that sites will collect and track data and use this data as part of quality improvement cycles, both at the agency level and at community levels. And so when we're talking about that, we're really talking about our DASMA platform and the ability for sites to sort of really use that data in a way that allows for continuous improvement of service and relevancy of service. And so that sort of a rapid and immediate access that sites have to data allows direct service providers to use that information in meaningful ways as they interface with clients and youth. But it also allows the hub to think through the service model that they have and if there's adaptations that they want to put in place to that service model to better serve the needs of youth that are walking through their doors or maybe aren't walking through their doors, and think about that in relation to outreach. And the final piece or the final milestone is delivering services and achieving additional training for service providers. And so really this is a growth and learning journey that we are all on, and kind of continuously building capacity and skill and strength and being able to deliver quality of service in this integrated model, and identifying ongoing needs for training and development is something that is part of this model and inherent to a quality improvement framework, which is inherent to implementation. And so that sort of continuous focus and commitment to growing and learning and improving is something that we anticipate seeing across sites as well. So I'll speak a little bit about the implementation science methodology that I referenced and why we use this methodology and why the backbone is here, and hopefully how the backbone can be a real support to you and your site. So what we know is that there's a plethora of evidence out there. There's still some evidence gaps and needs, but there's a lot of evidence in our system that we could draw from. And when we talk about evidence, especially across our backbone with the Provincial System Support Program and the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health, we're talking about evidence as a very dynamic thing. So when we talk about evidence, we're talking about research evidence, gray literature. We're talking about the evidence of people with lived experience, so youth experience, family experience, service provider experience, and all of this layering together to really mean evidence for us. And so we know that that evidence exists, but that evidence doesn't always get adopted into practice. So there's often very great ideas, a lot of evidence that we could use to form ideas or an innovation or a model or a project, but it's not always adopted. And then we can see kind of on that second row that if it is adopted, it's not always used with fidelity. And this is the piece where we talk about standardization across sites and an ability to standardize but also contextualize. So that fidelity piece is really, really critical. And we'll see that often we have little pilots sort of like models or similar models that kind of are all trying to do something similar, but that fidelity isn't necessarily always possible or implemented. If you look at that third row, if it is used with fidelity, so if we do have this good evidence that is adopted and put in practice and then it is used with fidelity, it's often not sustained. And this is what we're talking about for WIHU, that is about transforming the current service system and using the resources that are already in existence and really capitalizing on the strengths and capabilities within each site and within each community. Because that is really our mechanism for sustainability over time, is how these hubs can become the fabric of the community in which they're located. And so that backbone and using that implementation methodology and thinking those pieces through as we continue to go and thinking about how to engage, how to build in roles and responsibilities in really concrete and specific ways through an implementation process, how to kind of work out the kinks as we try something out for the first time, really supports that sustainability piece because it really is creating ownership across all of the network and all of the partners that are involved. And then for the last row, if it is sustained, so if we have all of these pieces in place, it's not necessarily always replicated. And again, this is where the methodology of implementation science can support us in thinking through how do we scale this? How does a really great innovation or a really great implementation of something or a model become something that can be replicated so that others can benefit from this? And part of this piece, especially around sort of fidelity and sustainability and replication, needs to be something that can be supported through evaluation and data so that we can continue to inform and scale. So we'll delve a little bit more into the backbone team and how the team can really support this structured approach to implementation. And I think one thing we often hear about implementation is that it can feel quite daunting sometimes. And really that is why the backbone is here, to sort of take on some of those pieces, and we'll kind of walk through them, that often feel quite daunting because the expectation amongst our systems is that people are doing this off the side of their desk. So the importance of having an implementation support team is really to be there to think through these processes of implementation with you and support those pieces over time. And that also, I think it's also kind of important to note that it doesn't need to be as daunting as it might seem. So implementation in itself is something that we do all the time and we do every day. We do consistently, and practitioners and organizations and agencies have been doing implementation and good implementation for years in our system. And this is just a little bit of a way to parameter it and understand it through specific processes and frameworks that we'll cover. So really what we talk about in relation to implementation is that we start off by identifying a change that needs to happen. So what is sort of not working in the system, or where is somewhere that we want to focus on in the system to improve? So that kind of collective identification of a change that's needed is really our first starting point. And for WIHU, we know that that's something we've heard for decades from youth and families in the system, is this need to have this sort of more integrated single point of access that's rapid and can serve their needs in a holistic way. So we really are basing what we're doing in a very strongly identified need in the system. The next piece is really that we figure out how to make this change happen, and a lot of that is pulling in the evidence or the evidence that does exist, thinking that through collectively as networks, as groups, moving through a process of trial and error, which we'll talk through a little bit, being open to being innovative and taking risk and trying things out. And you can see that in the third point as well. Just really kind of diving in and being willing to try out something new, lean into our discomfort, and work together for change. And then the fourth bullet there is just really improving the change so that it works within the context over time. And we have a system that continues to evolve. And within that evolution of the system, what we're trying to do is build something that has staying power and that makes sense and is agile and responsive, not only to the current system needs or the current needs of youth and families who are going to access it, but also to the future. And so really thinking about that evolving system and how we can do quality improvement and make something and put something in place that isn't so cumbersome that it can't evolve with the system over time. So I'm going to speak a little bit about implementation teams and what they are. And the caveat that I'll provide here is that when I'm speaking about implementation teams from the Youth Wellness of Ontario perspective, I'm really talking about a team structure that's built on capacities and expertise from PSSP, or the Provincial System Support Program, and the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health, because these were existing structures and intermediaries that support the system, and so the team structures are really based around this strong focus on implementation science and engagement, because those are the capacities and expertise across those two organizations, and really expertise that we know supports the system to move forward. So it should be noted that some of the other integrated youth service models that we've covered previously or earlier in this set of modules have different types of teams that support them, but really these teams are taking a focus on implementation. So I'm going to cover some of the expertise and capacities that these teams can specifically bring for WIHU. And so, as I said, there's sort of these two backbones that are coming, two backbone entities or organizations coming together to support the implementation. And really the beauty of sort of what we have in the province of Ontario is both a centralized and decentralized model. So the Provincial System Support Program has teams that are located across the province that serve in communities where they're located. And these teams can support in a variety of ways. So they're multifaceted teams that aren't clinical teams in nature, they're really implementation teams, and that's the focus of expertise. So they can support in things like project management, program evaluation and performance measurement, quality improvement, health equity, coordinating the kind of the process of moving through this implementation science methodology, coaching, so coaching on-site in a local context, coaching to the change. They can support knowledge exchange and sharing of information, communications, and then also we have the support of the CAMH Foundation and our funders and philanthropic partners from across the province that are also supporting us to think through fundraising at a local level as well. The other piece through the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health is that engagement piece, so really meaningfully engaging youth and families, thinking through advisory structures at a local level, supporting the provincial implementation of youth and family advisement and engagement, and so really supporting sort of with that angle as well. And so the complement of all of those different capacities and strengths are really at the disposal of sites and something that we can support in many different ways, and it depends on the needs of the site. But just to say that that is a resource available to you if it's something that you feel would be a benefit to your site and your network. When we work together in this way as well across these two organizations, we can support really some very specific processes. And so some of them are to really support guiding your implementation planning or work planning at a local level. We can support kind of creation of enabling environments through engagement, through the equity work, through reach out, supporting kind of thinking through how are you going to engage additional network partners over time so that this hub really can become a fabric of the community. We can support building stakeholder capacity and enhancing community readiness. So kind of those continuous pieces as you move through that implementation process and really bringing this hub to fruition. So one thing that we do know, and is based sort of in the evidence around implementation teams, is that they can really help improve uptake and use of new practices. And what we're talking about here through Integrated Youth Services is a new way of working in Ontario. And it's a really large transformative change, because what we're talking about really is working in a new way, integrating, co-locating some of those pieces, figuring out cross and interagency data sharing, approaches, service pathways. So really a lot of layering and scaffolding of many different approaches to work, and it is a substantial change. And so our team is here to help you as you move through that. We can also support sort of moving through a more formalized methodology, if you will, about thinking that piece through. And I'm going to talk a little bit about active frameworks of implementation and the stages of implementation that we sort of use. And in some ways it's in the background kind of guiding the work, but it is something that allows us to take a bit of a formulaic approach to how we move through this change and can enhance, again, back to that previous slide I was talking about, that sustainability. So really ensuring that that evidence is adopted and implemented in a way with fidelity that enhances the sustainability of your site over time, and that we can see this continue to impact the system positively as we move forward collectively together. So these are the specific roles that are encompassed within our backbone teams. You can see we have implementation specialists, core component and service pathway development, and that really is supported through our clinical lead. We have evaluation, knowledge exchange, and youth and family engagement. And so I'll just speak a little bit about each of these and kind of the specific expertise that they bring. So the implementation specialist can really support that project management kind of overview, that work planning piece, and that development of sort of all of those nitty-gritty roles and responsibility pieces at a site level over time. So really supporting your site and thinking through those pieces and really facilitating that process. So sometimes we know that it's beneficial, especially when all of the expertise is held within the room, to have that sort of backbone entity that's a little bit separate from that collective expertise facilitate some of that process and that thinking. The core component and service pathway development role is one that can provide consultation and support, both to the provincial scope of the project, but also the local hub teams. So thinking through those core components that we were talking about, those 13 core components, and how to really deliver and achieve that target implementation over time. And really the focus of this role is on that model of service. So as sites are working through their service provision model or your service pathways, thinking through data use, thinking through tool use, this really is a role that can be supportive to you as you move through those conversations and that thinking. Evaluation. So the evaluation can really provide support to collect, collate, analyze your data. It also can provide coaching to data, and so as you move through implementing DASMA and thinking through the DASMA platform, the evaluation role can provide support over time and coaching to that data. Knowledge exchange is a role that obviously can support kind of the interface and interchanging of information and knowledge at your WYHU site. It can also support taking some of the data, not just DASMA data, but data collectively, and making it into something that's accessible and sharing out. Can really help you as a site tell your story, and youth within your site that are engaged also tell their story. And so our knowledge exchange role is really one that can support sharing out about really what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and the impact of that in ways that are palpable and can really resonate with audiences. Youth and family engagement as well, providing consultation and engagement expertise to your local hub teams, and it can really support the development and thinking through of those youth advisories and family advisories. So really kind of thinking about how this can evolve over time and how we continue to engage, not just at the front end of a process, but throughout, and all of these pieces throughout in really meaningful ways. The other roles and responsibilities that are also part of our support system for sites, you can see here. So I've mentioned already the CAMH Foundation. So the foundation is really able to work with sites and provide consult and recommendations around local philanthropic activities, thinking through strategy in relation to fundraising. And so really they are an additional layer of support that's being provided to sites for sort of that ongoing funding piece that some sites are interested in pursuing. Each site also has a network lead. So the network lead is a member of your network, an organization or agency within your network that has a formal funding agreement relationship with CAMH. They're the flow-through funder for your network, and also kind of a point of contact and interface with CAMH and with our backbone team's leadership in an ongoing way. Sites also may have a steering committee, so some sites have adopted this model, some have not, but really the steering committee is sort of like the delegated decision-making body to continue that momentum and movement forward over time. They are kind of appointed by the network partners, who we'll speak about in a moment, to make decisions on behalf of the network, but in alignment and in the spirit of that integrated governance model that is one of the core components of WYHU. So the network partners are also that kind of collective group of organizations and agencies, possibly individuals, who make up your network. So who've all really signed on and agreed to work in this integrated way and deliver on this hub in your community. They are the integrated governance. So really that collective decision-making lies with that network. That co-development of the model with youth and families lies with that network. And they really are sort of all of the partners that are working together in a new way to integrate approaches and processes and to in-kind services to deliver on this model. The stakeholders can be very broad, and there's sort of multiple layers to stakeholders. So we have local level stakeholders, which are obviously part of the fabric of each community. And you may want to think strategically about your stakeholders at a local level in relation to how you want to engage them. Do they know about your hub? Are they invested in the hub? Are there ways that you can connect with stakeholders to continue to share out about that hub? And this is where some of our knowledge exchange work can really be of benefit here. We also have stakeholders sort of as a Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario entity, both nationally and internationally, as many are moving towards this integrated youth service model. And so kind of our stakeholders are very broad. And I think it's really important for us to always keep in mind about all the other communities across this province, across the country and internationally that are doing this work, and how we can continue to stay connected and share out and learn together over time. So I'm going to walk through the actual active implementation framework of stages. So there's sort of 4 or 5, depending, stages of implementation, and we're going to start with the exploration stage. So this is really, we kind of define the stage as understanding what it is that you're doing and deciding on it. So kind of understanding the landscape, understanding that evidence that we spoke about, and then really deciding on what it is you're going to do. These may seem sort of, as I said, sometimes people find them a little bit overwhelming to walk through, but really everything we do and all the work that happens is an implementation process, and this is just layering on a bit of a methodology and some language to that process. Your backbone team is really well-versed in this. It's part of our expertise and our focus, and so if there's any kind of pieces that I cover that you're more interested in knowing more about, please connect with your local backbone team and they can help you unpack some of these pieces. So when we're entering exploration, as I said, kind of there's some key goals that we want to achieve. And really where we always want to start is what's already existing in a community or across a network that is really the strengths and capacities of that group that will allow it to really implement whatever it is we decide upon with fidelity and with strength and to sustain over time. And so really kind of understanding what's already existing in your community and across your network is really critical, and facilitating a process of enhancing that strength and capacity. So as you move on to kind of the second piece there, facilitating community building, stakeholder engagement, and strengthening the network partnership, what we're talking about here is sort of thinking through who's at the table, who's not at the table, who needs to be at the table so that this can really be a robust implementation and really include all the partners that are going to need to be there at the end of the day to serve youth in a holistic way. So thinking through those pieces and reaching out and engaging and building sort of a consensus, collective consensus about what it is you're trying to achieve or think through, or the gap or need that you're trying to address, and then moving forward into building sustainability from the onset. And so the way that we can achieve that is to have that sort of fabric of the community, or have that hub be part of the fabric of the community by enhancing that engagement and building in stakeholder involvement and ownership of what it is that you're trying to do. The other piece that we're doing is ensuring that really everybody's understanding how the hub is going to align with the core components, those 13 core components that Dr. Joanna Henderson spoke about. Those are what we want to see across all sites. And really unpacking those and ensuring that your network has a common understanding of what they are and that everybody's on the same page is really a great place to start. So the installation stage is sort of our next stage, and really what we're talking about at installation is planning and preparing. So we'll often say, sort of those of us who work in the implementation field, that this is a stage that we sometimes miss or we sometimes don't give as much time as we should. And so this is sort of post-deciding what it is that you're doing, and for the purpose of hubs, we kind of know what we're doing, but through exploration, we're trying to make sure we're on the same page and we understand those core components. The installation stage is where we really take the time to understand exactly who's going to do what, how we're going to do it, what our process for execution is going to be, how it's going to look, and how we're preparing for that. So how collectively are we preparing for that? And it's really quite, can be quite an extensive process of thinking through all of the nitty-gritty details of something like a service provision plan or a service pathway, especially for your hub. Once you start to unpack all the aspects that are needed, your policies, your procedures, your kind of entry into service, outreach, collecting client data, and also the capturing of clients across multiple organizations that are involved. Really a lot of multifaceted areas of focus. Requires a lot of preparation and can take some time. And one of the things that we sort of always say is that you can put in the time up front or you can put in the time later, but you're going to have to put in that time. And so what we try to do here by building on this stage is to do that thinking up front, so that before you're actually putting your hub in practice or delivering services, some of this is figured out, and you don't have to do as much sort of quick improvements once you're actually operating a hub. So some of the key goals at this stage are that we're going to use all of the information that we gathered, so all that evidence that was informing the way that we were working. We're going to make sure that we have a plan. We call it an implementation plan, but really it can be a work plan, something that sort of articulates your plan of putting this hub into practice. We want to make sure that it fits the local context, so that it's going to work within your community. It makes sense to all the network partners that are involved. But that also aligns with that overall provincial plan. So we want to definitely see that fidelity to Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario overall. It will highlight some of the activities that are needed to implement, so trainings, resources, policy changes required. So we talked a little bit about roles and responsibility and figuring out who's doing what. We also want to sort of project into what some of our needs may be. And some of the alignment with the provincial model will actually help you think through some of these pieces. So as you look at some of our guiding frameworks, we could take anti-oppressive practice for an example. That might kind of allow you to think through who's going to need that training, how does that training need to look over time, and how do we plan and prepare for it. And so something like that is an example of how taking the time up front to think through that training and really document it and build it into a long-term plan can be done in this stage. We can also see that we want to focus on developing sort of plans that are specific to some areas, so data management and collection practices. So DASMA again, how are we going to utilize the information in DASMA? Are you going to collectively as a hub think through the information that you receive, sort of what kind of, how frequently are you going to do that? How are you going to execute or apply anything that you're learning through the DASMA data to change your service provision model or think through what your hub is offering? So really sort of laying out that framework and that plan for how you're going to actually utilize information and continue to improve and enhance your hub over time. The third stage is initial implementation. So we refer to this as testing and refining. So this is really where you just need to sort of dive in and try something out. You've done all of that planning, and that's why we go through that installation stage, to feel that we've thought through a lot of the pieces that we need to think through, and then we're going to just try it out. And something that we hear again and again from those across the system that are kind of moving through an implementation framework is that it's really it's a hard leap to make. Sometimes we stay in that planning stage for a long time. We're comfortable. We continue to think things through, and it doesn't always feel like 100% ready before we start initial implementation, and that is okay. That's what we want to do. We actually want to try it out in a little bit of a scaled way. So we're not going all in with the full model that we anticipate in a very, very robust way. We're trying it out. we're kind of getting our feet wet. We're going to work out the bugs through this stage, and we're going to continue to learn and grow as we move through the initial implementation. So some of the goals that we want to see are learning from mistakes. And that's okay. So this is not expected to be perfect on the first go. So for hubs, as soon as you open your doors, we're not anticipating that everything's going to be operating smoothly without any kinks. We actually want to learn from those mistakes, and that's part of the reason that we got to go into this stage in a bit of a scaled version. And so for some of you, that might mean you're not offering all of the plethora of services that we're going to anticipate seeing over time. Or you're not open all hours of service that we anticipate you will be over time. You're going to try it out small at first, work out those little kinks, figure out those mistakes, and you're going to celebrate because it's a big deal to start moving into this stage and actually delivering on service. And there's always sort of those little pieces that we want to tweak, but there's also pieces to celebrate for sure. And we don't want to get too bogged down in recognizing where we need to adapt something or improve something, because there will be a few, but there will also be moments of celebration where you've realized something or you've achieved something in the hub, and you really know that sort of when it's in its full, robust implementation, it's going to be something really significant for youth. So celebrate through this stage, and you know, take the time to congratulate one another and feel proud of what you're achieving. We're going to continue to build buy-in among community members and stakeholders. So this is actually a great place to kind of continue that buy-in and that community momentum. Oftentimes we think that needs to be something up front, but it's actually a continuous piece. And as we are in initial implementation, there's a huge buy-in factor here, because you can actually start to demonstrate a little bit of this hub in operations. And so even though it's not perfect, and even though it might not be in its full sort of robust implementation, really inviting the community in, inviting new members in, inviting youth in who haven't been engaged yet, doing outreach, and really helping people see the potential and see the future vision is something that can really start to, again, make this hub part of the fabric of the community so that it will sustain over time and it feels like a staple item within the communities and a really critical service platform. And then the final stage is full implementation, and we refer to this as being sustainable. So this is really where the hub has become just part of the community. It is part of that fabric of the community. It's something that people know about. It's something that youth are accessing. It's something that other community members or organizations who aren't necessarily part of your network also know about. And let youth know about and let families know about. So it is now just the new way of being or the new way of working. And in this stage, we want to see that all your processes and systems are in place. So it's kind of very fluid at this point now. You know what your policies and procedures are. You know how you're sharing data across organizations. You have agreements in place. You know what to do in relation to crisis. You know who's going to be at the hub operating when and where. You know your network. So really all of those pieces are a well-oiled machine at this point in time. You also are going to continue to monitor. So you also have those, all of your processes and procedures in place to continue to monitor your hub and ensure that kind of those two streams that I was talking about earlier in relation to operations and clinical have really strong oversight. You know how to apply information that you receive from them. You know how to improve them. And you know how to just ensure that you have a quality of service across all aspects of your hub that is what you've anticipated and agreed to. So if we dive into these core domains a little bit about what we're trying to evaluate and generate some evidence about for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, you can see a little bit more specifically here what we're focusing on. So we really want to understand youth and family perceptions of service and quality. So some of the evaluation will focus on that piece. We want to understand social and psychological functioning indicators of youth. So we really actually want to understand outcomes for youth, and we're going to base understanding those outcomes in functioning. And a lot of that functioning is going to be self-directed by youth, and so we're going to really follow their lead about what does functioning mean to them, and where do we see that enhancement of functioning in different domains of their life. And that's really why we're situating this model in one that's holistic and recognizes that youth are whole people, and that functioning may improve in some areas of their life and not others, but overall that's indicative of a functioning improvement for them and as defined by them. We want to look at the process of integrating services and implementing in each hub, and so I spoke a little bit about integration and our social network analysis. So we really want to see over time, how are we working together as networks, and how are we collectively working together as a province to really collaboratively come together in a cohesive way that's really wrapped around youth and their needs. We want to understand the degree of youth and family engagement, and again, so looking at how we have been co-developing with youth and families over time, what our advisory structures look like, and how this has impacted on the actual model in practice and what it has meant to this implementation. And then we want to look at the alignment with the integrated and step care model itself, so fidelity to that model, fidelity to those core components, and their target implementation and how they're being implemented over time. And sort of thinking through all of the pieces that we've covered, although a little high level through this module, hopefully some conversation can continue and some sort of reflective practice can continue about what this means and how you might want to think about this as a network and put this into practice. So one of the questions that we're hoping you might want to think through as a network are, what are some ways to work collaboratively with partners to build on existing frameworks? Another piece is, how have you engaged youth and family as co-creators or co-developers or advisors within this process? So what does that look like for your hub right now, and what do you envision it looking like in the future and over time as you move through the implementation? And especially as the hub is operating, what does this look like then? And that takes us to the end of this module. So for more information, you can visit our website, so www.youthhubs.ca. You can also email us at info@youthhubs.ca. And of course, you can also reach out to your local backbone team who are there to support you as you move through this process. So thank you for joining us today, and as I said earlier, if you have any more questions or you want to dive into some of these topics a little bit more, you can find more information in your guide to moving forward, and you can also, of course, connect with our backbone anytime. We're here to support you, and thanks for watching.